Good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that the ground on which we live is the traditional territory of Caldwell First Nation, of the Three Fires Confederacy, and the original people of Point Pelee and Pelee Island, and its surrounding lands and waters, and that of the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot peoples. We recognize and respect the First Nations who are stewards of the land and waters of Turtle Island, and who have embraced this stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of other nearby First Nation communities and all original people across Turtle Island. We will now have a moment of silent reflection, followed by the playing of our national anthem. Okay, if we can start off with a adoption of the November 28th, 2023 regular council meeting agenda.
So moved.
Support, Councillor Richo Spignolo. All in favor? That carries. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, an adoption of the minutes for our closed and regular meetings of council held November 14th, 2023 be adopted as presented. Councillor Reno and Councillor Desjardins, all in favor? And that carries. Mayor's comments, just a few. Last Friday, we had our third annual Heritage Nights tree lighting ceremony, and council would like to give a special thank you to all of our staff who have worked so hard to make the town look beautiful, from the lights at the Civic Center, the Event Center, even down Laurier Drive. And a huge thank you to the staff who worked so hard planning our Family Fridays, our Sounds of the Season Saturdays, and Sunday holiday night markets at the Event Center. Our first weekend was definitely a huge success. Lights will be on nightly from 5 to 10 p.m. And I just want to say it means so much to us to be able to offer all of our residents the opportunity to enjoy the holidays in our own community. Tomorrow is our budget open house being held at the Vollmer from 6 to 8 p.m. and we look forward to hearing from residents. This Saturday is Breakfast with Santa and the Mayor, so make sure to get your tickets before it's too late. And then finally, next Wednesday is our 2023 budget session, so comments from the public regarding the budget are encouraged and must be submitted in writing to our clerk by this Friday, December 1st at noon. And that's all I have for Mayor's comments, except it is very nice to see so many people here engaged in this process this evening, so thank you for joining us. So we're going to move right on to, we don't have any public meetings or presentations, so it's our staff reports and correspondence for council's action, which brings us to item 1, the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study. Notice the study completion. And I'm going to turn that over to our Deputy CAO, Mr. Mara.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. While we start to tee up the presentation, I'm going to do a brief introduction of the of my council report. So as you mentioned, tonight's report that I am presenting and that I'm here, that Dylan is here with us tonight to present, is dealing with the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study. And so certainly this project was conducted following the municipal class environmental assessment approach 2 for a master drainage study. As is standard in the town of LaSalle for these types of projects, prior to any report being published, we give council a high-level summary first of the findings of the final report. That is what we're here tonight to do. Following that, the high-level summary, the recommendations are for council to accept the high-level summary in principle. Then we work on issuing a notice of study completion and publishing the final report. Given the time of year and the notice of study completion, should all of that pass tonight, we anticipate that we will issue a notice of study completion early in January to avoid the holiday season. That opens up a final 30-day review period for that particular report. That's when the report becomes published, available for all to see, including council to read the details and the technical background behind a lot of the findings. But certainly we are here tonight to have the discussion and provide a high-level presentation of the report. And I'm joined today by Dylan here, and I'll let them introduce themselves, and I'll pass the floor over to Dylan, and then after Dylan's presentation, I'd have some closing remarks, and then we can move forward.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Mark Hernandez, and I'm the project manager for the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study. And with me here today is Dan Barassa, who is a biologist and a key contributor to the study in the area of natural environment. It's not moving. There we go. Okay. So the Howard Bouffard study builds off the recommendations of the 2017 Environmental Assessment Addendum, which in part addressed the stormwater management for the proposed developments. The purpose of the master drainage study is to address the spill from the Cahill Drain during major storm events, which can cause widespread flooding within the Howard Bouffard planning area. The Essex Region Conservation Authority indicated that it would be difficult to issue permits for development until the concern with respect to flooding is addressed. The study further supports development in this key growth area for the town by providing outlets for the proposed stormwater management facilities. The figure in this slide shows the potential for flooding within the Howard Bouffard area based on stormwater models prepared early in the study. At the commencement of the study, there were questions as to whether or not there was a spill, the rate of that spill, and the extent of flooding that might cause. Since that time, the spill rate and volume have been further refined through the Turkey Creek modeling study. This study follows the master plan approach number 2 under the municipal class environmental assessment. The class environmental assessment process is shown here, including the 3 PICs that were held, the first one in June of 2019, the second in December of 2019, and the third in March of 2023. There was a pause between PICs number 2 and 3, which was in large part due to the completion of the Turkey Creek watershed modeling study. The Turkey Creek study was led by the Essex Region Conservation Authority with the intention that all projects and studies within or affected by the watershed, as is the case with Howard Bouffard, would have a consistent and agreed upon reference model. PIC number 1 outlined the project need and justification, presented the alternatives being considered, and the initial preferred solution. The feedback included concerns about flooding, property impacts, timing for development, cost, and the funding mechanisms. PIC number 2 presented a revised preferred solution to address the feedback we received from PIC number 1. The revisions included accommodation of increased developable land, revised drainage alignments, sizes, and capacities. Similar to PIC number 1, the feedback included concerns about the flooding extents, the property impacts, costs, and funding mechanisms. Generally, we found that the developers were looking for ways to control the scope, schedule, and cost for their stormwater management for their respective lands to the extent that was possible. PIC number 3 presented a revised solution that accounted for the work completed as part of the Turkey Creek modeling study and addressed the feedback received through PIC number 2. We received further inquiries related to property impacts, property schedule, various elements of the preferred alternative, as well as clarification around the extent to which the preferred alternative would be subject to refinement through the detailed design process. Following PIC number 3, the preferred solution was further refined to reflect the feedback received. 3 alternatives were considered and presented at PIC number 3, including a do-nothing alternative, a solution featuring a regional stormwater facility, and a solution which utilizes the stormwater facilities presented through the 2017 EA addendum. The criteria for assessing the alternatives included natural environment, socioeconomic, cultural, heritage, engineering, cost, and timing. Although a do-nothing alternative does not address the study purpose, it still must be considered within the evaluation. The major features, this figure shows the alternative 2 with the regional stormwater facility. The major features of alternative 2 include formalizing the spill from the Cahill drain and capturing it in a dry pond adjacent to the spill that will reduce the rate of flow downstream. Extending, realigning, and reshaping of the East Branch Cahill drain to convey flows from the spill pond to a regional stormwater facility at the south end of the Howard-Bouffard area. The regional stormwater pond and pump station would replace the need for the local stormwater ponds and would provide quantity and quality controls with a discharge to the West Branch Cahill drain. East-west drains convey flows from the adjacent developments to the main drain. Flows are conveyed southerly through the East Branch Cahill drain to its confluence with the Canard River. A portion of the West Branch Cahill drain would be abandoned at the north end, while a section south of the Howard-Bouffard area would require maintenance. This figure shows alternative 3, which has the local stormwater ponds. And the major features of alternative 3 are generally similar to those of alternative 2, with one significant difference. Alternative 3 relies on the local stormwater ponds identified in the 2017 EA addendum rather than a regional stormwater facility. For the purposes of this study, and due to the number of unknowns with respect to each of the developments, we did not attempt to revise the pond locations and have used the locations as illustrated in the 2017 study. A detailed evaluation summary was completed with alternatives 1 and 3 identified as the preferred solutions for the categories as shown in the table. As noted earlier, alternative 1 does not address the study purpose, and so alternative 3 was determined to be the preferred solution. To illustrate this point, the do-nothing option would have the lowest cost but would not have resolved the concern with respect to flooding. After removing the alternative 1 do-nothing alternative as an unviable solution, alternatives 2 and 3 were then compared. When compared, alternative 3, which has the local stormwater ponds, has several advantages over alternative 2, which features the regional pond solution. Those advantages include less property acquisition, smaller channels and enclosures. It does not require the large regional pond and pump station, a lower construction cost, lower operation and maintenance cost, less time required to implement the solution, and it generally gives the developers more control over the stormwater solutions for their respective developments as they had requested. As noted earlier, the preferred solution was refined to address the comments received in PIC number 3. These changes include a revised alignment for the open and closed sections of Drain Reach 3, which is the section of branch drain east of Diot, as well as a revised alignment of the main channel crossing Bouffard Road. The preferred solution, as presented, is at a functional level of detail. As noted on the right side of the figure, we do anticipate that refinements to the drain alignments, cross sections, extents, and enclosures will be made as the detailed design progresses and in keeping with the intent of the master drainage study and the preferred solution. Further, as the locations of the local stormwater ponds are confirmed for the respective developments, refinements to the main drain and branch drains may be required. This slide illustrates a typical cross-section of the main drain, which generally consists of a main flow channel with 6-meter wide corridors on each side for use as floodplains, recreational areas, and access for maintenance. The main channel, as it is currently designed, provides for both conveyance and storage of stormwater to control the flows in the Canard River. We envision that this drain corridor would be designed as an amenity and would be a positive feature for the community. This slide generally illustrates the financing of the proposed solution, the opportunities for grants, and the benefit to both existing residents and new developers. Various mechanisms were considered for the implementation of the project and the recovery of the costs. At this time, the Drainage Act is considered to be the preferred mechanism, as it would provide for the detailed design, specifications, cost estimating, cost recovery, future maintenance provisions, and working corridors. At this time, the estimated cost of the project is $18 million, excluding property acquisition and the applicable taxes. Subject to council approval, we anticipate finalizing the master drainage study early in the new year with a 30-day review period commencing in January. It is anticipated that the Drainage Act process will take 12 to 18 months, with preliminary development plans being completed concurrently to the extent possible. The design will be subject to approvals from affected regulatory agencies, including the Essex Region Conservation Authority and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Tender and construction is anticipated to commence in mid-2025, with development design and construction completed concurrently. And at this time, we'd be happy to take any questions.
So I'd just like to provide a bit more commentary. So tonight's council report and the actions for council are requested, two requests with respect to the recommendation. The first recommendation is that council receive my council report as well as the presentation from Dylan tonight. The second recommendation is that council approve in principle the summary findings of the master drainage study and authorizes administration to issue the notice of study completion. And again, it's a legislative process. This will initiate a final 30-day review of the final report and all the technicalities behind the published report. That report will be made public through online and hard copies as well, so they will be available for the public to come and review. During that 30-day review period, we are still accepting comments relative to that. We are accepting comments up to issuing that notice of study completion. We will be accepting and addressing comments throughout that 30-day period, and there's also instructions within that notice of study completion on should there be factors that need to be elevated to the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, how that can be achieved and initiated. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Madam Mayor, we're available for questions. I understand there's 2 delegations registered for this particular topic. So at council's wishes, if you wish to hear the delegations, that's appropriate at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mara. We will now call our first delegate, Mr. Tabib and Mr. Crutch, if they'd like to come forward. So just to let you know, we have the 5 minutes for delegates, and we do have the submissions as well. Okay?
Sure. Mayor Milosh, council members, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. We're here in support of the town proceeding to the finalization of the EA. The reason we're here also is to ensure that there is that the final draft of the EA includes language that addresses previous discussions with the administration regarding the detailed design and final refinement of the final solution for the benefit of taxpayers, developers, and the town. We've asked the administration on multiple occasions to have access to the report. We were denied that, and for that reason, without any knowledge to the details of the report, we're here to request the language to be ensured in the final report. I also have Mr. Dan Crutch from Landmark Engineering, if there's any additional technical details or questions. Ask.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I think Dr. Tabib has addressed most of what we are here to represent, and I'd like to just emphasize again, you know, we've had opportunities to review some of the information through the PICs, and we have still some outstanding concerns and questions regarding both the scale of some of the features that are included in the proposed design, recognizing it's a functional design level, not a final design. We've expressed some of these concerns, and we acknowledge it's preliminary, and we are looking forward to the opportunity through that subsequent detailed design process to provide some further input. Really, as Dr. Tabib indicated, we're here tonight primarily just to ensure that there's appropriate wording in the EA document that commits the town to those refinements and consideration of those refinements that are being identified. Again, I think there's an opportunity for substantial cost savings to be realized for the benefit of all stakeholders, not only the developers, but even the taxpayers in both Windsor, Tecumseh, and anybody else that would be contributing costs towards this solution if it's undertaken or implemented under the Drainage Act. So again, with that, we're just really looking for appropriate wording to be embodied in the final document, and we're hoping for an opportunity to see some of that wording, but we'll leave that with your discretion.
Mayor Meloche, we listed some of those in the addendum that was added to the agenda. Thank you.
Administration, is there anything you want to add to those comments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Certainly, we are putting in that language in there. This process is anticipated to be completed through the Drainage Act process. Through that Drainage Act process, as those solutions are developed, as a landowner in the area, Dr. Tabib and his representatives have the opportunity to make the request of that engineer to review various things, and those things will be done as part of that process, and subsequently any benefits to any parties will be appropriately assessed. So certainly we recognize that it will be part of the discussion within the context of the report. There is a lot of communication and correspondence back and forth, which also folds into the report under the consultation addendas as part of the report. So you'll see most of that stuff within the report.
Thank you very much. Members of council, do you have any questions of the delegate before we move on to the next? Councillor Burns?
I guess with the language to Dr. Habib and Mr. Crouch, obviously you've had some discussion with our administration, and I would assume that all your questions weren't answered or you wouldn't be here. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think really we're here to ensure that those commitments that have been expressed through email exchanges with administration very recently, that they are actually encompassed in the document that is submitted to formally commit, council or the town to following through with those expressed commitments. And as I said, most of them just relate to refinements of the design, how they're to be implemented, and that's really why we're here. Just, it's fine to exchange emails, but I think it's important to get the proper language in that EA document, and that's really what we're, soliciting to council.
I guess to administration, does that appear to be a problem, or is that an easy solution for us?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. As Mr. Hernandez presented the solution as part of his presentation, he did note that there was going to be future refinements as part of the detailed design. So if we get specific relative to one of the requests, it's whether the drain as it proceeds south either zigs or zags. So whether we go one way or the other way is what the request is. It's shown one way right now, but it's fundamentally available to swing around along the way to better implement and be able to provide more efficient development processes and proposals. And again, as Mr. Hernandez mentioned, the stormwater management ponds that are shown are functional in nature. They will be further refined through future draft plans of subdivisions and things of that nature within those respective areas. So as all of that gets flushed out, there's some commentary regarding parks. Right now, there is no parks out there, so we can't use parks to flood on the interim because there is no parks available. So if it becomes part of the solution, those parks have to be designated and given to the town. The town does not pay for parks through the planning processes. Those parks are conveyed to us gratuitously. So if those are part of the solution, they will need to be conveyed to us as part of the solution, but they will need to be first identified where they're at and do they make sense to be part of the process or the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Worship Administrator.
Okay, thank you very much. I would now like to invite Mr. DeMarco. Yep, have a seat there. So just a reminder, you have the 5 minutes, and I do realize you're speaking on item 1 and 2 at once. You're right? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I on? Madam Mayor and Council, thanks very much for giving me this chance to appear before the Council. My name's John DeMarco. I grew up in LaSalle, but went away a long time ago, spent most of my life elsewhere. Came back recently to the area, but now living in Kingsville. But I'm trying to contribute something to help to create the kind of town in LaSalle that will be proud to leave to the next generations. I'm speaking to those two items of the drainage plan and the secondary plan because they're obviously interrelated. And my recommendation is simply that it's premature to go forward with a single option right now for both the drainage plan and the secondary plan. There's obviously a lot of work that has gone into these plans, a lot of momentum behind it, going back probably decades, but I wonder if enough reflection has been taken place on what kind of new town we're really trying to build. And I wonder how many people in LaSalle even know that there's a plan to build a whole new town of more than 20,000 people, potentially doubling or more the population of the town. I know this has momentum behind it, but I wonder if this might not be the time to think more carefully about what we want to create as a town, not just create more generic suburbs, not just maximize the land for housing, which appears to be one of the implicit assumptions, but as I say, look at what we can create. And I was just reading today about the waterfront project in LaSalle, and I want to congratulate the council for an outstanding project and also an outstanding example of how a community can be creative and think about, okay, we have this potential, what do we do with it? Why are we not using the same kind of process for creating this new town of 20,000 people? Why are we treating it as a technocratic exercise? So without trying to delay the project for the sake of delay, I think it should be looked at very carefully. And let me just mention a few points. I don't know if I'm already breaking the rules by holding up the map of the emerging preferred plan. And I know you can't see much from where you are, but you're probably all familiar with this. So it's a big step forward from the versions that were released in September, where many of the woodlots were not even visible, as if they were going to be eliminated. So some of the woodlots have reappeared. But the key issue is that they're still disconnected. Some of these yellow and orange colors are housing and even mid-density housing that would form permanent barriers that would prevent for all time the opportunity to reconnect the natural areas. And that's a policy of both the town plan and the county plan, is that in any development plans, there are, not only should existing natural areas be protected, but there are formally designated restoration opportunities, they're called, that should be taken into consideration. And I haven't seen anything yet where those restoration opportunities and the associated policies have been handled. Maybe they're somewhere in confidential reports, but as a member of the public, we haven't seen that. So the result is these woodlots, and coincidentally, we're now realizing that these woodlots are of national and even international importance because there's talk of including them in the Ojibwe National Urban Park, which is great. And I'm not talking about this only because of the urban park, but that's a reminder of the importance of these and for the future of that park to reconnect these natural areas. And the great thing is we have the opportunity to do that because it's a greenfield development. We'll never have this much open space to work with and move things around. As the engineers have said, things can still be moved around. So in this plan, for example, again, you won't be able to see all the details, but there are these scattered stormwater facilities. As I said, there's the hard breaks between some of the natural areas that can never, ever be restored and repaired once we build over them. So if I flip over the card, this is just, and this is part of my submission that you have, this is just an example, just to get us thinking at a wider range of options. I would say that's the key issue with the two proposals that you're being asked to approve. They're not bad proposals as such, but both of them are based on a very narrow range of options, perhaps for historical reasons going back 20 years. So what we can do here is those scattered stormwater facilities, we can draw them into a central core. We can create a corridor which will serve many purposes, including managing water, including creating ecological corridors joining these woodlots and to Ojibwe, which is off the map to the top, but we hope they will all be connected. And to the south, why not continue down to River Canard, into Amherstburg, down to Lake Erie? All that is possible. And all that, it might seem like a wild dream, but that's exactly what was done with the Rouge National Park in the GTA. It connects Lake Ontario through a diverse landscape right up to the Oak Ridges Moraine. So I suggest this kind of vision would be worthy of calling it a national urban park, and I would say is something that we should at least attempt, at least make an attempt to see what can we leave to future generations. If I could just have a second. I Googled today, what are the points of interest in LaSalle, Ontario? You have to put aside LaSalle, Quebec. In LaSalle, Ontario, what are our points of interest? Not a lot. I'm sorry to say it, as a native of LaSalle. We have the chance to design the future here and not just let it happen, and that's what I'm suggesting that the council is in a position to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Administration, is there anything you want to add before I go to council?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. DeMarco's presentation seemed to be primarily suited towards the secondary plan topics. I think one of the comments that I recall hearing is that council should not approve the Howard Buford master drainage study tonight. Certainly, it has been a process. It's following a legislative process. All the technical details will be contained within the report. I recall hearing from Mr. DeMarco as well that he's looking to get a copy of that report, and that will be available subject to council's approval tonight come January, and that information will become available to Mr. DeMarco and everybody else who wants to see it and available to review. Other than that, there was very little relative to the drainage, and certainly the aspirations of what he has depicted is quite significant compared to what we are doing with respect to a drainage study and a solution with respect to the drainage. So that's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of council, if you have any comments regarding the Howard Buford, the drainage part of the act, not the secondary plan, we can discuss that. Otherwise, reserve your comments for when we get to item 2, and we can kind of go back and discuss maybe questions you may have that would suit item number 2. So just so we keep things clear, this is just for the drainage part that we're going to discuss. Mr. Mara?
Sorry, I will take the opportunity to build on what Mr. DeMarco has mentioned and brought up. Council has a unique opportunity today to see two processes converging. In the same area, one leads into the other and provides information to the other. So there's a unique opportunity here to see one process coming to a completion or potentially coming to a completion, and one process going through the rest of the stages of consultation to fold in some of the information that's coming. This area has been subject to a number of studies, a number of different layers per se. They are all coming together through the secondary plan, which is subject of the next report, but it gives council an opportunity to see how these two processes are starting to now congeal together, and how they will start to feed into one another, and then further be refined through detailed design and subsequently draft plans of subdivisions and things of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of council. Councilor Reno?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. If I could have the consultants back up for just a moment, please. And Mr. DeMarco, if you could stay, because I'm going to have a question of you as well. I wasn't going to pick one or the other, but probably it'll be a quick and easy question. You both had to get up. Sorry. You mentioned in your report that in the beginning, you basically kept the stormwater ponds that were originally proposed. And then you talked about going through PIC 2 and PIC 3 and how you took a bunch of information from the public and from the developers and things like that. Were any of those stormwater pond solutions, were they moved in the third stage or around the third stage, or are they basically the same ones that were originally planned from years and years ago?
Thank you very much for the question. The alternative 3 with the local stormwater ponds, the ponds depicted are either existing and are as is in place, or are represented as is shown in the 2017 EA addendum. We didn't take any liberty to move their locations. As Mr. Mara mentioned earlier, there's a lot that still has to happen in terms of the development submissions and what might happen in terms of proposals from the developers. So without having had that information available, the next best thing that we could do was rely on the 2017 document.
And so in your process, were there any suggestions to move any of them at this point? Or is that still just too far down even for them to figure out?
Certainly, we did receive feedback about, that there are opportunities to move those ponds, and we acknowledge that. But for us to look at doing that in isolation without the developers and the developers' representatives, it would be premature. So at this level, I think we've adequately captured the needs of those developments. And as Mr. Mara mentioned earlier, the matter of moving the ponds to a different location, I think can be fairly easily accommodated through the Drainage Act process.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mara?
Councilor, just to build on that point, so the 2017 EA shows ponds conceptually again. And so through detailed analysis, when the landowners come in to develop those areas, they start to refine the location of that pond for the respective pond drainage area. They do that in a number of ways with laying out streets, laying out all these other aspects, parks and school sites and all that other stuff. In this particular area, next topic is going to be talking about the planning process. Yeah. So so they are shown conceptually, will be further refined through that planning process as those opportunities become forward and available. That is the process of the way it goes. They need to go through functional design studies for those particular stormwater management ponds, how they work and how they manage. At the end of the day, both this drainage solution and future ponds are going to be owned and operated by the town, so we have to have real good input to that because we need to own, operate, maintain these, and it needs to be done in a fashion for any future homes in there to make sure that they are safeguarded and things of that nature from flooding. Thank you.
Okay, so if there is any future moving or suggestions or things, there is still room in the process for those things to happen. Thank you. I guess my last question then would be for Mr. DeMarco. Have you presented your findings, your map to our consultants at any point during this process about the drainage? Because I see that you've got a bunch of new stormwater ponds reimagined in your picture. Have those been submitted as a possible viable alternative?
Yes, this is the latest version and the most detailed, but since March, when the comments were officially open on the master drainage plan, I made a written submission describing in words the concept of a multi-purpose corridor that would handle water as well as make ecological connections. And I think I've made a subsequent submission in fact, I've written a couple of letters to mayor and members of council with versions of that along the same lines.
Okay, fair enough. Just knowing that we aren't necessarily the ones that are professionals here, I just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to vet your ideas to our team that's working right now. And you're saying, yes, you have had a chance to get those ideas to them.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I did, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Nothing? Okay, so I think we've addressed Mr. Tabib's concerns there, so Mr. Morrow will continue to work with them to be sure that the language is there that's needed. Mr. DeMarco, we will probably address most of your comments in the next item, which is the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan. And at this time, if I can get members of council to look at the recommendation that was put forward, which is that the report of the Deputy CAO dated November 10th, 2023, AD 2023-14, regarding the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study be received, and that council approves in principle the summary findings of the Master Drainage Study report and authorizes administration to issue the notice of study completion. Moved by Councillor Burns, support by Councillor Riccio Spagnolo. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much for joining us for that item. And we'll move on to item 2, which is the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan, the Emerging Preferred Plan. And with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Planning and Building, Mrs. Beggs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Back in April of 2023, council authorized administration to reinitiate the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan. And what that plan is slated to do is to do an overall comprehensive land use planning exercise to coordinate land use that considers transportation, servicing natural heritage, land use densities, recreational uses, siting of future schools, and parkland. So the secondary plan exercise will essentially look at all of those components and try and balance all of those competing interests. At that time, the planning partnership and a team of sub-consultants here with us this evening have been working diligently in partnership with administration to develop the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan. So the intent of this report and the corresponding presentation tonight is to provide council with an update on the status of the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan project, the discussions that we've had to date with the major landowners in the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan, as well as the agencies. We've conducted a number of interviews with the developers and the landowners in this area and had some productive discussions. So that has fed into the process. And we've also helped to explore and understand the natural heritage system. We've done quite a bit of work on delineating and defining the natural heritage system as part of the Emerging Preferred Plan. And so the task of this report and presentation tonight is to provide a comprehensive update to council with those elements in mind. With that, I will ask Mr. Palmer from the Planning Partnership to walk council through the update presentation, and he will also be highlighting the next steps in the secondary plan process.
Thank you, Gudrun. I can't remember, am I supposed to push the button? IT's going to do it? Okay, great. It's great to be here back in LaSalle. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I've been working on your behalf for about 20 years. It's been a while, it's been great, and happy to be here tonight, notwithstanding the snowstorm on the way. Next slide, please. As Gudrun mentioned, we've been retained by you to prepare a new secondary plan, and we are working our way through a process. And I'll talk a little bit about where we are and where we go as we go through the process, but it's important for you to know that we are not doing this alone. We have LGL, who are highly qualified ecologists. I'm here with Grant Kaufman today from LGL, and they're looking after the natural heritage system. That is an important layer of the official plan that will get found its way into the secondary plan and forms the basis of what lands are to be protected from development. And it's different than what has been in the official plan and zoning bylaw because it's up to date and has been developed through more detailed analysis. I also have on my team SES consultants, they're civil engineers. A ton of work has been done in this secondary plan area, and their job is really to try and help me understand what has been done, what is relevant, where the gaps are, and what we have to do to make this plan work from an engineering perspective. And that includes stormwater management, which is a pretty fundamental part of this work. We also have Lee on our team. They're transportation engineers. Again, the municipality has already done a transportation master plan, and the goal of this plan is to implement that transportation master plan. As always, we're working in really close collaboration with municipal staff. You have a lot of expertise here, and that is all very helpful as we work through this process. Next slide, please. Many of you will be aware that about 20 years ago, there was a secondary plan prepared for this entire area, and it bestowed upon the lands development opportunity that has been very slow to be realized. And there are a number of reasons for that. Certainly, stormwater management is one of them. Nonetheless, that 20-year-old plan was rescinded in your new official plan, with policies included in the new official plan to prepare a new secondary plan. That was an appropriate thing to do, primarily because that 20-year-old plan was based on 20-year-old planning principles. Anyone who's in the planning business these days knows that the legislative frameworks can change bi-monthly. So we're trying to utilize the new official plan, recognize up-to-date planning principles, and create a great community here in LaSalle that, by definition, will be different than existing LaSalle. Next slide. We do have a process that we're going through, and primarily the first part of the process, phases 1 through 3, have been dealing with agencies and the landowners to get a clear understanding of what the aspirations are from the development community and what the requirements are from the school boards, the county, and the Conservation Authority. That has been informed also by some conversations with municipal staff, keeping us informed of all of the nuances that are inherent to the Howard and Bouffard secondary plan area. As we move through the process, and again, we're calling it the Emerging Preferred Plan. Very specifically, it's a work in progress. This is about informing you about what we've been doing and where we go next. We're not here, we're nowhere near ready for any kind of conversation about approvals. We're simply in a process, working through some ideas. And in the new year, we expect to be establishing some opportunities for public input, as well as the meeting the statutory requirements of the Planning Act for this type of process. Our goal is to deliver a plan suitable for adoption by this council in the first quarter of 2024. Of course, it will need to be approved by the county. We're also trying to get before council zoning, which is an additional step not typical of this process. So we're hoping to have a secondary plan with all the associated supporting background studies, as well as proposed and approvable zoning as a way to get things moving a little bit quicker than otherwise. Certainly, there are still things in play. Over time, things get more and more solidified as we work through the process. But nonetheless, the goal of the secondary plan will be looking for appropriate wording to provide the flexibility to respond to detailed work as that work is done through the development approval process. Next slide. You may recall our first discussion was about the study area It's a little bit different than it was 20 years ago. Some of the lands have been developed, some remain undeveloped, but certainly this is the study area, Malden Road on the west-hand side, although it doesn't get right to the road in all locations. Howard Avenue over on the east side, kind of bisected by Laurier Parkway and Disputed, creating the 4 quadrants of the area. This is a very large secondary plan. This constitutes about 940 hectares. That's a significant chunk of LaSalle. And using the numbers that we've been working with so far, this represents about a 20 to 30-year supply of housing. It's certainly not going to happen overnight, and there's lots of time to work out the details as this secondary plan area evolves into the future. Next slide. Gudrun alluded to the fact that we have been meeting with the development community as we've been going through the process. I've been here 3 times, not including today. And we've had about 30 meetings with individual landowners. We're trying to understand the landowners' aspirations, but also importantly, how those aspirations on individual properties fit together to create an appropriate community here in the town of LaSalle. So it's a bit of back and forth. The goal is to create a great community utilizing the most up-to-date planning principles and understand and try to implement as much as possible the aspirations of the individual landowners. Again, about 30 meetings, including one today. I think Gudrun has another one on Friday. We did hold a 4th meeting here in LaSalle, and I brought in my engineer to talk about the idea of a landowners group. The goal of the landowners group would be to talk about collectively issues of phasing, issues of cost sharing. As you heard earlier this evening, there is a fairly significant piece of infrastructure that needs to be developed in order for much of this area to be developed and achieve appropriate built forms. That conversation, I don't believe, has resulted in the implementation of a landowners group, but I'm always hopeful that it remains on the table for conversation going forward. At the same time we met with all the landowners, we have been meeting, we've had 3 sets of meetings with staff from the county, from the Conservation Authority, and representatives of the school boards. Certainly, they all are providing us some ground rules that we have to think about when we're talking about community development. How many schools do we need? Where should they be located? What do they look like? The natural heritage system, how does that work? Flooding, stormwater management, and of course, simply what does the county have to say, since they are ultimately today your approval authority. So that work continues with that group. Next slide. I put this slide in because the goal of this community is going to be, how do we reflect the principles that underpin the entire official plan? And this is a reminder that the official plan at the very beginning identifies these 6 fundamental principles. And it's our job to make sure we're fulfilling all of them. They are all important. They are all definable under current planning policy. And it's a really important concept that we work toward creating a new community in Howard and Bouffard that achieves these principles and that is a part of LaSalle that this council and every resident in it can be proud of. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Grant Kaufman, and he's going to talk about the process that he goes through to establish the natural heritage system and all of its components, and then he gets to tell me in our planning exercise what lands must be protected consistent with provincial policy.
Thank you, Ron. Sorry, technical difficulties. Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. As Ron said, my name is Grant Kaufman. I'm a senior planning ecologist. I'm with LGL Limited, Environmental Research Associates. And what I'm going to do tonight is present our approach to preparing a preliminary natural heritage system for the secondary plan area. And if I could have the next slide, please. So our approach is going to be the basis of my presentation. Our first step was data collection, and we did collect data from secondary sources that were already available, as well as some limited field reconnaissance. We also took a look at policy, and we looked at the official plans at the upper and lower tier municipalities, as well as the provincial planning statement and the policies of the Essex Region Conservation Authority. The next step was I'm not sure this mic is working correctly. Is it okay? Okay, thank you. The next step was to delineate the natural heritage system. The process for that was to identify natural heritage features, determine their significance, then identify what features constitute the core natural heritage system, and then to identify what other natural heritage features out there would complement those core features. And that would be things like corridors and connecting links and buffers or setbacks and restoration and enhancement areas. And based on that, we would be working with Ron to develop policies in order to protect your natural heritage system over the long term. Next slide, please. So the data that we collected, we looked at obviously the official plan, both at the county level as well as within the town. We reviewed environmental impact assessments that have been prepared within the town. Those are for private land development as well as for environmental impact, things like municipal roads and Class EAs and so on. We also collected data from IRCA, and that included their Essex Region Natural Heritage System Strategy. We looked at the various GIS data layers that they had available to us, things like ELC vegetation, drains, and the Ontario Regulation 15806 limits, and the regulated floodplain. And there was also an update to the candidate natural heritage area inventory that was prepared in 2010. What we did is we took a look at some recent air photos, and we used that information to delineate features that may not already be identified. And primarily we used what's called ecological land classification. So that's a provincially recognized process for identifying vegetation communities within the province. And we were able to, by looking at those air photos, delineate approximate boundaries and types of those features. And then what we did is we went out into the field and we did some field reconnaissance in order to help verify those boundaries as well as confirm what type of feature it is we were looking at, whether it was a woodland or a savanna or a wetland and so on. So I should note that we did not have permissions to enter, so all the work that we did in the field was from public lands and rights of way. So that, that obviously is a limitation of the study. Next slide, please. So from a policy standpoint, we looked at The proposed provincial planning statement, it has not been approved yet, but the natural heritage policies are identical to those that are in the provincial policy statement of 2023. So that's what's being proposed moving forwards by the province. So as far as we're concerned, they're pretty much interchangeable at this time. As I mentioned earlier, the official plans at the county and within the town, and the IRCA policies as well. Next slide, please. So the basis of the natural heritage system comes down from the province. We're given the policy at the provincial level, and the upper tier and lower tier municipalities have to be in compliance with or consistent with that provincial policy. And the natural heritage policies within the province require the municipality to identify and protect significant wetlands, significant woodlands, significant valley lands, fish habitat, habitat of endangered and threatened species, significant wildlife habitat, and significant areas of natural and scientific interest. And there are various guidebooks and manuals that are available to municipalities, consultants, and so on that tell you how to go about identifying those features at the local level. For a feature to be significant, that means it's provincially significant. So it has a fairly high level of importance within the broader natural heritage system. And all of those items from the natural heritage policies were considered as part of our delineation of a natural heritage system. Next slide, please. So let's go through those one by one. I won't take too long with them, but I will give you an idea of where the information came from. So the first item was significant wetlands, and that information is available from the province. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has that information, and it's available through a database called Land Information Ontario. And it's updated on a regular basis when wetlands are evaluated or reevaluated. So that was easy to get that information. There's also unevaluated wetlands. So those are wetlands that are identified but haven't been evaluated according to the wetland evaluation system. And it was interesting because when we looked at this study area, there weren't any that were unevaluated. But when we did our air photo interpretation and our ecological land classification, we did identify some unevaluated wetlands as well. Maybe the next slide. So the yellow wetlands shown on this slide, I know it's very hard to see on the screen, but the yellow ones are provincially significant, and the blue ones are, boy, I'm squinting as well, are the unevaluated. And the unevaluated wetlands, for the most part, were part of other designated natural heritage features, so they do get captured within the core, even though they may not be provincially significant. Next slide, please. The next item we identified were significant woodlands. And we did that by compiling various data layers. The Essex Essex County Official Plan, significant terrestrial features from their OP, the Essex Region Natural Heritage System Study, which identifies forest communities, as well as our own ecological land classification. And then what we had to do was determine which of those woodlands met the criteria for significance. And we used basically two criteria to determine that. We said that woodlands larger than 2 hectares in size were significant, and that's consistent with the county official plan. And the woodlands also had to be contiguous. And by that I mean if there was a gap larger than 20 meters between each forest polygon, then they had to be considered separately, which meant that their size had to be considered separately. So if they were within 20 meters, they were complexed, which meant the total area could be accounted for. Next slide, please. So when we took a look at the woodlands, these are the ones that we determined were significant. Next slide, please. Another natural heritage feature is fish habitat. And for the purposes of the secondary plan, what we did is we basically said all watercourses within the secondary plan area provide fish habitat. And that can be either direct fish habitat, in other words, there's fish actually living in the water body or watercourse, or it could be indirect or supporting fish habitat, meaning that the watercourse would contribute to fish habitat located downstream, typically. And there were different data layers that we were able to obtain for that. Part of our ELC, we identified what's called open water. OAO is the code for that. There's also Land Information Ontario database and Land Information Ontario database. Sorry, one is the watercourse layer and the other one is the drainage layer. We took that information and presented it to the town because we wanted to get input on municipal drains. So there was a bit of a reconciliation between what was classified as a drain and covered by the bylaw versus what was in the secondary source information. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the watercourses and water bodies that we identified as fish habitat within the secondary plan area. And I should stress that these watercourses are existing watercourses, okay? So this is where fish currently reside. It does not take into account the subject of our first presentation tonight, which is the drainage study, because that'll be in the future. We wanted to identify what was there. All right, moving on. The next item was habitat of endangered and threatened species. That information was gleaned from environmental impact assessments where it was available. And we don't mean for it to be comprehensive, where we were able to obtain the information, we've presented it, but that doesn't mean that we've been exhaustive. There still could be many more areas out there that provide habitat for endangered or threatened species, that we had to go with the information that we had. The same approach was taken for significant wildlife habitat. For that, we used secondary source information, and the same rules applied. We could only identify what we knew based on existing sources. We did look at the provincial database. The Natural Heritage Information Center has a database of species records and rare species occurrences, so that was also taken into consideration. Next slide. What we're showing here is just the habitat that is not already covered by one of those other natural heritage features. So if it occurs within wetland or significant woodland, we're not showing it on this map because it's redundant. It's already getting picked up. So these were the additional areas that we identified. Next slide, please. So there's two other items that are part of the provincial policy statement. One is significant areas of natural and scientific interest. We don't have any in the study area. That one was easy. The other one was significant valley lands. And once again, because this area is so flat and most of the water courses are in our drainage features and so on, we don't have any significant valley lands. So that was really easy. We were able to leave that off. Then what we looked at is, well, is that comprehensive enough? Well, yes and no. There were still a few gaps. So one of the additional things we did look at was environmentally significant areas, and the LaSalle Woods is one of those features, and only part of that area was captured. So we made sure that we captured the rest of it. And next slide, please. I think there it is. Okay, thank you. So this shows the ESA, LaSalle Woods ESA. Next slide, please. So what we did is we took those areas and we overlaid them and we created what we call a composite map. So I've shown you all the pieces or building blocks that went into the natural heritage system. What we then did is we overlaid them all one on top of another, and this is what we were able to derive in terms of what we feel is your core natural heritage system. I do stress it's preliminary, it's subject to refinement, but we feel pretty confident with what areas that we've identified today. So our next step was to look at ways of buffering these core areas. And the buffers are very important because they can help to protect the integrity of these areas. But if you are prohibited from developing within those buffers, over time they succeed and they become part of the natural heritage system itself. So buffers and or setbacks, they're very important. What we did is we prescribed a 10-meter setback from significant woodlands, a 30-meter setback from provincially significant wetlands, a 10-meter setback from unevaluated wetlands, and a 15-meter setback from fish habitat. We didn't apply any setbacks to significant wildlife habitat or habitat of endangered and threatened species. And the reason we did that is because those need to be determined on a case-by-case basis. So we can't prescribe a universal setback. What we find is if you don't identify a minimum setback, you don't get it. So it's really important that as a minimum we accept that these setbacks are reasonable and defensible and need to be applied as part of your natural heritage system. Next slide, please. So what we're showing here now is your core features as well as the setbacks that we've shown. And obviously the scale isn't great. The other thing we wanted to look at was there a potential for restoration and enhancement? Next slide, please. Thank you. And there are two areas that we were able to identify from the secondary source information where restoration and enhancement is part of the planned development. So we identified those areas as potential restoration or enhancement areas. And then we also looked at other opportunities, and this kind of feeds into the corridors and connecting links aspect, and that is we looked at what the Conservation Authority had identified as regulated floodplain, because typically that area would be, development would be restricted. And we also looked at the fill regulation, Ontario Regulation 15806, and those regulated areas. Now, not all of those areas necessarily will restrict development, but it does give you an idea where there might be some potential opportunities to create those connections and linkages and to do some restoration and enhancement. And if you can put up the next slide, please. You can see those areas are shown on this slide. So those are areas where you could potentially do some restoration and enhancement in order to create the connections and linkages with adjacent natural heritage features. Next slide, please. So typically what's required is when you go to do the development, you have to do what's called an environmental impact assessment or an environmental impact statement. And if you're within a certain distance of a natural heritage feature, that would typically trigger that requirement to do the study. And what we're proposing is to use 120 meters as it's referred to as adjacent lands. So if you're within 120 meters of the natural heritage system, that would trigger the requirement to do an environmental impact assessment, and that would help to establish and confirm the features as well as identify what areas could be developed, what areas need to be protected long term. Next slide, please. So this is the natural heritage system that we are recommending at this time. And if we go to the next slide, what that shows is areas within 120 meters of the natural heritage system. So you can see it does cover a fair bit of area, so it does trigger the requirement to do a fair bit of investigation, but that's okay. That's part of the development process in Ontario. One last slide, please. So where do we go from here? Well, we still have to do some minor refinements to our natural heritage system, and that'll be based on review by agencies, developers, as well as the public. And then we will work with Ron and his team to develop the policies that need to be implemented in order to maintain and protect the natural heritage system over the long term. And once we've been able to accomplish that, we'll finalize the natural heritage system, and that will be incorporated into the secondary plan area, and then hand the whole thing back to Ron to do his thing, just like I'm going to do right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. That's wonderful. So my starting point today is the environmental protection areas identified in dark green. This was provided to me by Grant. And in our opinion, this is the beginning of a defensible, appropriate natural heritage system in the Howard Beaufort secondary plan area. In total, these lands, which include the buffers, represents about 22% of the total land area. So it's a significant element of this community. As Grant identified, this will come with a policy framework and requirements for study in order to facilitate any forms of development adjacent to these features. Next slide, please. This slide, and I'm going to be showing different layers as I go through, so hopefully they'll show up. What I've done on this particular slide is I've added in some of the stormwater management facilities from the 2017 EA addendum, as well as proposed locations for public parks. Public parks are based on about 5% of the gross land area, which is the land area less the natural heritage system. So you can see here what we're trying to do as much as possible is put the parks, the storm ponds, the storm system, the big solution that you heard about earlier, together to try and create a connected system. The caveat to a connected system is we need to make sure that there's still parks within the communities. We don't want to starve the residential neighborhoods from having parks. So typically, there are some large park elements, and as you'll see on a later slide, they're typically located in proximity to a new or proposed school. So again, the goal is to use the stormwater management system with the natural heritage system and some of the park elements to create a more robust, connected system. This will play an important part when we get to the layer of active transportation and trails. This provides an unbelievable opportunity to link to the LaSalle's great trail system. The other thing that's on this map is the hydro corridor. I don't want to diminish the importance of the potential for that hydro corridor to also be a recreational connector. Not an environmental one so much, but certainly an opportunity to provide some of that connectivity that we're looking for throughout this plan. What's important to note is that we will be promoting the idea that development will provide the 5% parkland dedication. Obviously, some landowners will have less than 5%, and some will have more. The idea is to equalize that through the contribution of cash in lieu of parkland so that the municipality can compensate those landowners who provide more than 5%. But that's the typical residential parkland dedication requirement for this area in the Planning Act, and we will be talking about that in the secondary plan. Next slide. The Transportation Master Plan, these are the primary roads that are included in your Transportation Master Plan. It's already in your official plan, so it's really important that we carry that work forward. Certainly, this development area is quite large, as I mentioned before, and a whole local road network will need to be developed along with the plans of subdivision that will come after this secondary plan is completed. So this is just the primary road network. We've left on all the existing local roads, but certainly we're not proposing any new local roads. We're leaving that to subsequent approval processes that is appropriate. Next slide. This one's a bit light, but in a very light yellow, we've identified all the existing residential development within Howard Bouffard. There's quite a bit of existing single detached residential development, and it's important to recognize that. Some of it's older, but some of it is relatively new, and we need to make sure that we're dealing with those properties and making sure that relationships between new development and existing development are appropriate. We call it compatible development, and that is defined and articulated in your new official plan. These are quite low density and represents kind of a historic development pattern here in LaSalle. Next slide. This slide is what I'm calling the low-rise residential areas, but it's not typical low-rise LaSalle. This would include opportunities for single detached, for semi-detached, and for street townhouse forms of development. As you can see, it's a significant part of the secondary plan area. Here, in accordance with current zoning, these areas would be limited in height to 10.5 meters, which is your typical single detached maximum height permission. Next slide. These are areas that we're proposing today for mid-rise residential development, and these areas would permit block townhouses and low to mid-rise apartment buildings. Maximum height here is 15 meters, which is about 5 stories. Here we're trying to enhance the range and mix of housing types that are developed here in LaSalle, and there's a great opportunity to do that in various locations within this secondary plan area. Next slide. This slide identifies what we call the mixed-use corridor. And in LaSalle, the official plan identifies 2 mixed-use corridors. Malden Road from where we sit today out to Laurier Parkway and along Laurier Parkway to Howard Avenue. These are a really important element of your official plan and this plan. The intent is that this mixed-use corridor would accommodate a range of higher intensity housing forms and also retail and service commercial uses, restaurants, office uses, hotels, convention centers, recreational, entertainment, and cultural uses. There's a lot of opportunity along this corridor. Minimum height is defined by an angular plane, or maximum height, which is articulated in your zoning bylaw. But fundamental to the principle of this mixed-use corridor is that over time, in combination with the LaSalle Town Center, the Malden corridor, and the Laurier corridor, this starts to become the spine of a more robust transit system, which enhances mobility options, as well as options for more affordable types of housing. So this is a really important part of this secondary plan in conformity with the official plan. Next slide. This slide identifies potential opportunities for new schools. You will note that in total, we have the existing high school, but we're also identifying symbolically 2 elementary schools. Those are the dots that already are there, and those are proposed within current planning documents. And we've identified opportunities for 3 other elementary schools. So for a total of 5 elementary schools and a high school. This is a pretty significant introduction of new educational facilities. And we're still working with the school boards to confirm whether this is enough or what the configuration of the sites should be, how big should the site be, how big does the park need to be in proximity, and so on. So we're still working with the school boards to confirm all that. Out over on the east end, there is the existing church facility that has also been identified as major institutional. Next slide. This one's hard to see, but carryover from the current official plan is the business park designation, which is intended to accommodate more traditional industrial business park type uses. That basically fronts along Howard Avenue south of Laurier Parkway. That's been part of the official plan for quite some time and is recognized in this plan. Next slide, please. So when you put it all together, this is the beginning of an emerging preferred plan that is going to form the basis of some future conversations with the public, with staff, with the agencies, and with the landowners to work toward a final plan that will be codified in a secondary plan, which will be an official plan amendment. What's important to note here is that this particular layout with the various components would generate somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people. So it is a significant development opportunity on a very large part of the town of LaSalle. So we're looking at 8,000 to 10,000 dwelling units, just under 2,000 jobs generated for schools, retail service, commercial, industrial business park uses. Again, this is a big plan, and it will have an important impact on the town of LaSalle. The goal is, of course, that it fits in with existing LaSalle, but also provides enhanced opportunities for different forms of housing, provides opportunities for retail and service commercial uses, includes parks, and includes schools. The goal is that it's a complete community that fulfills people's needs on a daily basis, all in proximity. So not everyone has to drive everywhere for everything. Next slide. Again, the emerging preferred plan, again, I mentioned that it's specifically phrased that way. It's a work in progress, so we're not done. But we're working towards having something out there for conversations that are ongoing. As Grant mentioned, there's still work to do in refining the natural heritage system. Certainly, the distribution of development density and the consideration of developer aspirations, direction from your official plan, implementation of good planning principles is all something that is being discussed. We're not in alignment yet. We may never all be in alignment. However, we have to work towards something that achieves a great community for the town of LaSalle. Again, we're still working with the school boards on the number, scale, and location of those schools, and that goes along with discussions about how public park space is to be utilized. A really important component of this plan is making sure that the development yield that the plan ultimately produces is in keeping with decisions about sewage treatment capacity that is currently subject to an agreement with the City of Windsor. Going over existing capacity allocations has significant implications, not impossible, but implications, and we want to make sure that we're considering all of the opportunities and all of the implications so that when we come back to talk to council, you're fully aware of where we are and what we're proposing to do. Of course, this is very important today that you're hearing about the stormwater management as well as this plan, because that's a pretty fundamental element of this plan. Interestingly, stormwater management is not typically a fundamental element of a secondary plan. It is here because it's one of the reasons that nothing has happened here, or very little has happened here, for 20 years. The municipality has carried out a study in 2017 and this EA that you've been working on at significant expense. And that is intended to unlock the development potential of at least, I'm going to say, 2/3 of the Howard Bouffard secondary plan area. So it's really important to codify in this secondary plan, whether or not it's a conceptual element of the plan or not. We are continuing to work on that, but absolutely it's an important part of this planning exercise. Next slide. You'd be happy to know this is the last one. I know my throat is happy. What are we doing Q1 2024? So starting in January, hopefully wrapping up in March, if that's possible. We're going to start with a public open house. We haven't put our minds to the format of that open house. My expectation, it'll be workshop-esque. We'll probably have at least 2 sessions, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, trying to capture the maximum participation rate. And once that is over and we understand and potentially make adjustments to the plan, we'll be starting the work on the actual codification of the plan. That starts with a justification report and explanation of the plan, the preparation of the actual secondary plan, and as I mentioned, the zoning bylaw that goes along with that. We would then be back before council at a statutory public meeting to present the plan, and you'd be able to hear from the public and likely the development community again at that time. After that, it's really up to council to decide whether significant changes are required or whether you're comfortable enough to move forward with some adoptions and approvals. So with that, I'm happy Grant and I are here to try and answer some questions or whatever you would like us to do. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you very much. We do have 2 delegates, so maybe we will go to our delegates first, and then if after that, we'll go to administration, then to council. Okay, so first we're going to call up Kristen Derbyshire. Hello, just a reminder that our delegates have the 5 minutes, so feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you. I have a presentation as well. I was told it would be. Okay, cool. So my name is Kristen. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you guys. I am glad to hear that we are in the preliminary stages of the Howard Bouffard secondary plan, because there's a few things in the map that could be worked on when it comes to the natural heritage system. A large part of a healthy natural heritage system is healthy ecological corridors. So when I say ecological corridors, what do I mean? Next slide. So this is a little blurb from the Parks Canada website. To continue to play their important role, protected and conserved areas must also be connected. So basically the goal is to have healthy connections between our green spaces in LaSalle. The map that we have right now doesn't connect a lot of our green spaces, unfortunately. Next slide. So where should we implement them? So as I said before, the goal is to design a landscape where natural spaces connect to other natural spaces. Next slide. This is just an example of a disconnect between green spaces that we have on the current plan that would be better suited as a corridor to connect them. There's lots of other places you could see there's a lot of fragmented dark green on the map. We should really be connecting them, and here's why. Part of the reason why, which is allowing the critters that live in those green spaces to cross through instead of having to cross into our backyards and through our parks. So next slide. Why do we care about deer and coyotes in LaSalle? So animals need those corridors to cross between the natural spaces so that they can find alternative resources. They need to move. They need to be able to get food in the other places. They also need to mate outside of their family. If they're confined in one space, their genetics could be weakened and they could die out. Next slide. So particularly deer, as you guys know, we want deer to be able to have green spaces to pass through so they're not on our roads. Less car accidents means safer and healthier residents, lower car insurance rates, less roadkill. We got to make sure they're not on our roads. And in order to keep them off the roads, they have to have corridors. Next slide. Coyotes. We know in LaSalle coyotes are a little bit of an issue historically. These are a couple news articles I just really quickly Googled. We've had a couple coyote attacks in the news in the past few years. One's from 2019, one is from actually 2023. So they pose a threat to our pets. If you guys can recall that park space in between the green spaces that I pointed out earlier, right beside a school, coyotes will have to cross through that. So we want to make sure that they have corridors instead of having to pass through our public parks where children play and dogs run. Next slide. So I just wanted to put the Howard Bouffard secondary plan into a different perspective that might not have been thought of before. Right now we have a perfect opportunity to really take advantage of the Ojibwe National Urban Park, which we have some candidate lands in LaSalle proposed for this park. This is going to be a national park. It's going to bring in tourists. So we should really be milking this opportunity. What are the odds that we're going through this big development plan right in the midst of the implementation of the Ojibwe National Urban Park, which is such a brand new idea for Canada. We only have one national urban park in Canada so far. It's in Toronto. We want to set precedents. Next slide. So at the top there is just a little map from the Parks Canada website of the candidate lands in LaSalle in particular. The biggest one there in the center, you can probably recognize that's LaSalle Woodlot. That is part of the Howard Bouffard secondary plan. That's all going to be protected. But the Howard Bouffard secondary plan and the implementation of the ONUP, or Ojibwe National Urban Park, are happening simultaneously. So what are the odds? We have the opportunity now to invest in an environmental protection initiative which sets precedents, shows other municipalities how lucky we are to live amongst LaSalle's beautiful natural areas, and maximize the potential tourism dollars that'll come from the National Urban Park. We understand that these initiatives cost money, and you have pull from other people who don't really care, developers, et cetera. This is a good fiscal reason that we have to invest in environmental protection policies. Next slide. So in summation, the goal is to implement stronger ecological corridors. Right now, the current plan, it's not looking too good. The implementation of ecological corridors will not only benefit LaSalle's wildlife, but will also benefit residents by minimizing the risks associated by animals forced out of their habitats and into our backyards and onto our roads. We want to protect and restore our wildlife in LaSalle. As you guys know, we have really unique ecology here. We want to make sure we're protecting that. And we may as well maximize the benefit of the Ojibwe National Urban Park that's on its way to LaSalle. Let's milk the National Urban Park. We can set precedents. We have an amazing opportunity here. Next slide. So I just wanted to end on a quote by Margaret Atwood. She's an environmentalist, as well as an author, of course. And she's relatively local. She founded the Pelee Island Bird Observatory. But nature is an expert in cost-benefit analysis, although she does her accounting a little differently. As for debts, she always collects in the long run. So I thought that was applicable. This has a lot to do with money, but nature always collects her debts. And that's the end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have next Rachel Mills, who'll be joining us on Zoom.
Hello, is everyone able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. We just can't see you yet.
Oh,
I don't know if that's us.
for some reason, I apologize deeply. My video is not connecting. Is that going to be problematic for?
Nope, go ahead with the presentation.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So of course, thank you all. My name is Rachel Mills and I am a LaSalle resident. My concerns are surrounding the immense and fleeting opportunity for conservation and connectivity initiatives to restore a viable ecological corridor or a green core between the National Urban Park at Ojibwe, the candidate lands being offered in LaSalle, natural heritage and designated restoration opportunity lands in the Howard Bouffard planning area that would be worthy to be an extension or complementary enhancement to the National Urban Park. I am happy to hear of the now more thoroughly communicated considerations for our natural heritage, habitats, and the restoration opportunities in the presentation prior to me speaking. So I did want to add that in. That is very positive. Nevertheless, LaSalle can be a model and leader for our commitment and prioritization of forward-thinking connectivity, cohabitation, naturalization, and restoration initiatives. But we do still seem to be favoring and proposing some outdated, undisputed, and unbalanced styles of planning and development and water management in the areas like Howard Bouffard that still have natural heritage and agricultural land to enhance, protect, and connect while we can. We cannot continue to normalize losing and jeopardizing our natural heritage, our habitats, and the non-human species to fragmentation and encroachment, as natural heritage both holds and adds tremendous value for our community and should always be at the forefront of planning alongside human development requirements. The decisions to deprioritize the connection of our unique natural spaces is still apparent in this infancy stage of the emerging preferred plan. The good news is we can still build upon it and help it grow and be imagined into something better. My future in LaSalle depends on the decisions being made now that will continue to impact future generations and our unique and diverse species who all need a safe and adequate space to live, thrive, and call home. I am optimistic, but I am also deeply concerned that we're trying to pass off the obligations to those who will come next where it may be too late. We need to hastily stop and reverse the status quo of development and planning and the dismissal of nature's critical contributions and importance. Something to really reflect on is humans cannot replace or recreate nature's complexities, its achievements, or its contributions once they have been diminished, as they historically have been, which we can also see in LaSalle. We can only make efforts to steward and foster such ecosystems with cohabitation at the forefront. I urge the completion of a full environmental impact assessment and natural heritage report, along with the terms of reference for impact assessments in the Howard-Buford planning area, which would then be shared with the public, as this is a huge project, a couple of thousand acres. Transparency and heightened public awareness for this planning and its impacts are paramount, where it's proposed to create a town within our town. It's estimated that there will be a significant elimination of some natural areas officially recognized in the environmental overlay category of the Essex County official plan, and additionally, land that was designated as restoration opportunities lost as well. Without the transparency on this plan's impacts, we are left to deduce the above critical eliminations or fragmentations in these areas would be contradictory to the statements that our mayor has made surrounding the offering of LaSalle's candidate lands, and even an eventual possibility of additional town properties for the National Urban Park. I could not agree more that LaSalle is running out of green space, and it's always threatened by development. With intentional incorporation of restoration and connectivity, we can enhance those natural spaces that contribute to a better LaSalle that we are known for. The housing crisis is not the only crisis we need to focus on and make efforts to mitigate, as we see our way of life change and evolve to accommodate growing needs in all realms. We can't solve one issue while dismissing and deprioritizing the environmental ones that have all-encompassing consequences to us all and the atmosphere that we're all neighbors within. I am very eager to see how LaSalle will take action and honor these priorities for conservation and protection that I have heard spoken on numerous times. We have a natural heritage foundation of which LaSalle and the surrounding communities benefit from and are very proud of. Let's continue to intentionally and effectively enhance, expand, and connect these vital and irreplaceable habitats so that we can all thrive into the future. Of course, thank you for all of your time, and I hope that we can work together with more forward-thinking planning and development for this area, across LaSalle, and for surrounding areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to administration if there's any comments before we go to council.
Thank you, Mayor Milosh. I think I just wanted to say thank you to the Planning Partnership and to LGL for their presentations. Thank you to the delegates. We've been doing a lot of really good work on the project since April. We've had a lot of productive discussions with the community and the agencies. And all of that feedback that we received went into preparing the draft emerging preferred plan. We heard early on from the community that the natural heritage system was important, and we all recognize that that's true and it is important. And so we, through the assistance of LGL, had the proposed natural heritage system prepared, and that was guided by the provincial policy, and that's really what we use in order to define and delineate the natural heritage system, as Grant has so eloquently outlined. So we thank you for the opportunity to present, to hear our work to date. We're excited about moving through the process and coming back to council with the results of our public consultation in the new year.
Thank you. Members of council, do you have questions or comments regarding Deputy Prada?
Thank you, through your worship. I've got a question for the gentleman that presented, and it's about setback. And it's just to make sure that I understand the distance of setback. So if we start to, in my mind, I'm looking at the presentations that the folks have done and the flood areas, if I can use that term, or areas where water collects. If we did is it a 160 meter setback, the distance that you presented? I just want to make sure my notes are correct, and then I'll ask my subsequent question.
The setbacks are specific to the type of natural heritage feature. So we recommend different setbacks based on what the feature is. So woodlands might be different from wetlands, which are different from fish habitat.
My subsequent, it'll become clear. So with wetlands or floodplains, if I look at the center of the area where the water is that 160, or is that the distance from the center, or the area that is engorged with water at that specific time? The furthest area that the water expands, is that where we're going to start measuring, or is it from the center? I just want to make sure that I understand in my head the actual area that we will have. Is it from the center out, or is it from the widest expanse of the water out?
So that is typically determined, there's different methods that can be used to determine where that setback starts from, depending on how well defined the channel is. So if it's ill-defined, meaning there's no obvious banks, you would take it from, there's different approaches. You could take it from what's called the meander belt. So a stream isn't necessarily straight, although because they're drains, they're very straight in LaSalle, but they typically wouldn't be. The meander belt is the pattern, the flow pattern of the stream. And you could take the setback from the outermost extent of the meander belt. If it's a better defined stream, then you would take the setback from what's called the top of bank. So if you would go out and you would have to stake what is the top of bank, and basically that's where the ground breaks into the channel. Okay, so you basically come up to grade. You can also look at the floodplain, although we wouldn't typically, it's hard to, we wouldn't typically take the setback from the floodplain, but you could from the outer limit of the floodplain. Or you could take it from the watercourse itself. And in some cases, if it's a intermittent stream and it's a very poorly defined watercourse, you probably would take it from the center of the feature, the lowest point. And that's where you would establish your setback. So there's many different approaches that can be taken. That's something that could be spelled out either in the policy or in the environmental impact assessment requirements. And typically the Conservation Authority will weigh in on that and prescribe the way you would approach it. So I'm not sure exactly how it's being done in LaSalle, but different municipalities do take different approaches to it. The other is a high water mark. If it's not a water course necessarily, if it's a body of water and so on, usually you use a high water mark. You could for a water course as well. And that's pretty much the elevation that the water course would achieve under high flow conditions. So I probably confused it by giving you so many options, but there are different ways you can approach it.
No, thank you, Your Worship. I like the different options, and I like the fact that we get to consider them based on the fact, like you say, the high water mark, the center, the water touch point, because what I'm looking at is so theoretically we could have larger areas around water features other than the prescribed distance based on the highest point of the water or the flood area, and we would be able to determine that in support of some of these plans at having a wider area around water to protect the watershed, simply based on the number of options that you've given me here.
Absolutely. And we're suggesting 15 meters. That's fairly typical for warm water streams within the province of Ontario. If you had cold water streams, you would typically apply a 30-meter setback or buffer. There's no reason you can't prescribe a 30 meters. It's up to you. It really is up to you how you want to approach that.
The only thing I would add is it does need to be justified. It's not just pick what you want. So it's very important. And again, going back a little bit to what we heard earlier, the flooding and the use of the existing drains, particularly on the lands west of disputed, is going to be modified by the bigger stormwater solution. So it's really important to know that absolutely it all has to be refined. There will be an opportunity to talk about what the appropriate corridors might be, but the individual drains are something that their role, function, scale, and the water that's in them may change once the big solution for stormwater is built and operational.
Thank you, Worship. If you don't mind, one supplemental. Justified. I'm looking to find I understand the layman's definition of justified. Is there a legal definition that I need to refer to when you talk about justified for the decision?
Through you, Your Worship, that's a really important question. For example, if there was a 100-year storm and there's a defined 100-year storm limit, that would be an automatic preclusion of development, and that would establish a corridor width. However, the addition of some setback may be justified for environmental or safety reasons, but the selection of a huge setback for other purposes not related to the flood would not necessarily be justified unless there was a significant natural feature that was within it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that you need to have you can't just pick a number.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Riccio Spagnuolo.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Palmer. So you had alluded to that you had hosted about 30 meetings with developers, landowners. Was that reflected in your report this evening? Like a lot of their suggestions and feedback, comments?
It's an ongoing process, but yes, we're listening.
Okay.
But we can't, my job is not taping together their plans because that does not a community make. We have to think about the whole area, and we're balancing development potential with opportunities to provide sewage treatment, making sure that stormwater management facilities are there, schools, parks, et cetera. So absolutely, we're listening. Sometimes they don't think we are, but we are absolutely listening and trying to balance all of the elements to create a good plan.
Thank you. Just another supplementary question, or maybe a statement. I have spoken to some developers and landowners, and they don't feel that you are listening. I'm just putting it out there. So that's why I feel that it is important to get this public consultation. So I am happy to see that it is going to be held in Q1. So hopefully that's in January, February, early. However, I do feel that it's something that our developers and landowner community should be having these more in-depth conversations.
Through you, Madam Mayor. It's really disappointing to hear that they don't think we're listening. I think what they mean is we don't necessarily agree with everything they say. That's not the same as not listening. And it's very important to know that we have met on 3 separate occasions with each landowner group who wished to meet with us and have gone through their plans, our response to their plans. So it's not fair to say we're not listening. We are.
I'm just relating some messages. I do believe that they should have been here to be delegates, so absolutely, but I'm just relating messages for people who weren't able to attend this evening. That is my position here as a councillor to defend, or not defend, but to relay messages and communication for our residents. I do like a lot of the plan that you had submitted this evening. I just feel that right now to receive this report, I need more time for myself and more clarification from administration on different feedback from what they've spoken to with developers and with administration, that we as council have not been pertained to that information. That's where my thoughts are on this.
Okay. Members of council, any other questions? No? I just have a couple. I know we're in the very early stages as far as consultation with the public. We did have Play Speak open for the short period of time there in the beginning, which is not a normal process, but something we felt was important since this is such a big decision for our town. Something that's not part of this report, but I don't even know if it's part of the report in January or the public open house, is we talked about two things tonight, which was equalizing development and compensation for the pieces of land we would need to create the natural heritage. Are those numbers going to be part of an eventual report to showing us the cost it will be to the municipality to obtain those lands to create those natural areas? Is that, I realize that's not your position, but as administration, is that something that will be presented to us before we say, yes, we agree with what's being presented, knowing that this is going to cost the municipality this much extra?
I may need to lean on Ron for some support to answer this question, but it's not my understanding that the municipality is obligated to compensate landowners when natural heritage features are designated. So we have a responsibility as the municipality and as a planning authority to designate features that warrant protection without having to compensate.
So I guess my question would be then, if we are looking at nothing specific, I just pick a spot in the map that could have been developed, but we're looking at now as a natural heritage site, and the developer can no longer build on those lands, how are they compensated for the investment on those pieces of land?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they are not compensated. The designation as significant natural heritage means they're not developable. It doesn't mean that you acquire them, although that may be an option, but there is no compensation for a designation of natural heritage.
And those lands are currently designated natural heritage. We're not changing them to natural heritage.
Through you, Madam Mayor, doesn't matter. We've done new work that is supportable,
Okay.
defensible, based on science. Now, I say that, very specific words that I use. It is, as Gudrun said, the responsibility of the municipality to identify and protect significant natural heritage features and their associated functions. That sounds like a quote because it is. That's not compensatable. It's really important, however, that through a secondary plan process, all of the environmental work is done at a certain level of detail. As Grant mentioned, this work is primarily desktop work, air photos, existing information. The plan will always include an opportunity for that designation as environmental protection to be challenged by science. That is a common and typical approach because the level of detail that is a secondary plan level of detail will need to be proven through 4-season site visits to fully inventory the level of significance of the feature. So there is always an opportunity to challenge the designation, but with the information that we have done through Grant's work, you have the requirement and responsibility to protect that land from development, and there is no compensation for that.
Thank you. I guess the next question would be, sorry, I have a bunch written down here and they're kind of all over. We will be having the open house in January. In the meantime, are we still continuing these discussions with the developer community? And are we also still considering some of the comments made by our delegates regarding the green space connection? Is that still part of this, or is that not until the open house stage and we wait for feedback then?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's always a work in progress. We are continuously considering commentary, both what we heard tonight and through submissions from the development industry. We're also happy to talk about adjustments based on any further changes to the EA for stormwater management. It's our job to consider everything we hear, but in the end, it's our job to give you our best plan, however that comes about. So everybody has something to say. Nobody's wrong, but it's about the balance.
I agree completely. Balance is probably the hardest thing we're going to have in this secondary plan. And as Councillor Riccio Spagnolo said, our job is to represent all of the voices. And I think tonight we have proved to some in the community that we haven't dismissed the natural heritage features of that area, because that is a very strong comment we had heard over the last few months. And I think the presentation you gave us was extremely in-depth, but helpful for even council to understand what's been done and what that future of the area holds. But like you said, finding balance between the new development and the existing homes that are there is going to be difficult, and finding balance between our development community and keeping those natural heritage is going to be very tough. And the one thing I learned in 2010 when I got on council is I can't make everyone happy, and someone's going to be mad at me. But I just want to make sure that the plan that comes forward does represent the best for the community going forward, and that's representing all 34,000 people at this time. So I just want to make sure that, like you said, we're working together and we're making connections and we're doing the best we can to have a balanced approach going forward. I just want to be sure that over the next couple of months that all of our residents still have a great chance to have their say and to submit their concerns. I actually expected a lot more people here this evening, which is, I'm not sure if it's a good or bad thing. I haven't figured that out yet. I'm sure I'll hear afterwards. But I really thought we would have more people here speaking for or against it, so it's kind of interesting coming out of this. I appreciate everything that's been presented. Thank you to the delegates as well, because I think their information was very well presented, and we understand what they're looking for. Whether or not it's obtainable or not is maybe a different story. But I think that it was a great presentation on everyone's part, and I thank you for it. And at this time, if members of council don't have any other comments or questions, you'll have to decide. There is a recommendation in front of you. You can either move with that recommendation, or if you have something else you want to put forward. The recommendation is that the report of the Director of Planning and Development dated November 10th, 2023, regarding the emerging preferred plan for the Howard Bouffard Planning Districts be received, and that administration proceeds with the public consultation phase of the secondary plan process. Members of council, what would you like to do tonight? Councilor Reno?
This is thank you, Your Worship. This is all part of a process, and we can't really stop a process in the middle. We have to see it through. There'll be some things, like you said, that will be favorable for some, that'll be unfavorable for others. However, we'll never know what that looks like unless the process is allowed to continue moving. So I will move the recommendation.
Okay, moved by Councilor Reno, support by Councilor Desjardins. All in favor of receiving the emerging preferred plan? Opposed? Yep.
Opposed in the sense that I would prefer to have the public consultation involved in this before we receive this. But I also understand the delay. We don't want continuous delays, so I understand that too. But for myself, I prefer to have a public consultation before we receive this report, in my opinion.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and that carries. Deputy Mayor, did you have something to add?
Through your worship, I just have one question about the designation. And I just want to make sure that I'm a legislative guy, so I'm going as quickly as I can to look at the legislation. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right. The Ontario Heritage Act, Section 29, gives the municipality the designation ability. I just want to make sure that when I go away, I'm able to consume the legislation and understand it so that I can make sure that I understand what you gentlemen have said to me today.
Through you, Madam Mayor, this is not through the Heritage Act. This is a requirement of the provincial policy statement. I don't know the section number offhand, but it's very specific about natural heritage system. So you can check there, but it is also followed up with a handbook on how to establish a natural heritage system, which I believe Grant would be very familiar with because he followed it. And there's also a lot of case law that talks about it, and I'm happy to provide some of that information through Goodrin if you're interested in reading that.
Through your worship, I would like to, because again, as the questions come up, the better educated I am and able to direct those asking questions to the legislation as opposed to my interpretation of your words is what I want to make sure that I do, so I don't muddy the waters or create confusion. I'd always rather refer someone who asks a question to the piece of legislation for them to read it. And if you've got supporting case law too, I'd love to consume it and better understand where we're going to go. So thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. So just to kind of make sure everyone's aware, we've just received the report tonight. There's not been an approval. It's receiving it to move on to the public consultation part so that we can hear more from our developers, any other landowners, residents. So it's just kind of to continue the process, but nothing at this point has been approved. We are just receiving it to move on. So that is it for item number 2. We will move on to item number 3. Thank you for joining us. You don't have to stay if that was all you're interested in being part of. But we will move on to item 3, which is the appointment of our Integrity Commissioner, and I will turn that over to our Director of Council Services, Ms. Esther Alpo.
Thank you. So as you are aware, the town is required to assign certain responsibilities outlined in the Municipal Act to an Integrity Commissioner. Our current Integrity Commissioner was appointed back in 2015, and it was now time to go out and RFP these services again. As you're all aware, the Integrity Commissioner is responsible for investigating code of conduct violations for members of council, for members of committee, providing training, providing advice to members of council and committee members on conflict of interest and ethical responsibilities. And we did issue an RFP, I want to say probably mid to late September. In response to that request for proposals, we received 2 submissions. The Deputy CAO and myself scored those and reviewed those submissions, and as a result of that scoring system, Davies Howe, a firm from Toronto, scored the best, and accordingly we are recommending that they be appointed as the town's new Integrity Commissioner. I do wish to point out that the current Integrity Commissioner did not submit a proposal. He was made aware of the fact that we were going to RFP and invited to submit.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council members? There being none, recommendation is that the report of the Director of Council Services dated November 7th, 2023 regarding the appointment of an Integrity Commissioner be received, and that Davies Howe LLP be appointed as the town's Integrity Commissioner effective January 1st, 2024 for a 3-year term subject to the execution of an agreement between the parties, which agreement shall be to the satisfaction of the town's legal counsel, and that the Mayor and Director of Council Services be authorized to execute said agreement. Moved by Councillor Burns, support by Deputy Mayor Capada. All in favor? And that carries. Item 4, Committee Framework, and I will again turn that over to Director of Council Services.
Thank you. So again, this is a project we started late last year, in reviewing the committee framework and what policies and procedures govern the operation of our committees. As part of that review, it was decided that terms of reference be created for each of our established committees along with an overarching policy. So in my report, I have gone through and I have attached the terms of reference for each committee that we have established and attached a copy of the draft report, the draft policy. And I just want to highlight a few things within the policy. So a few things that we've done differently with this policy is we removed, historically we've had a 2-term limit for members of committees. We are proposing that be removed in part because we do not see a significant volume of applications for the committees in which we are seeking applicants. And I think putting council in a position where they're constantly required to waive a policy because we don't have the applicants is unfair. At the same time, it's nice to have the expertise on some of our more technical committees, Court of Revision, Committee of Adjustment, where the experience of the committee members serves to benefit those committees. And oftentimes, as committee members get more comfortable on those committees and they get more knowledgeable, they're more willing to reapply, and we aren't trying to go out and get new members to apply, because we are getting some of those existing members applying year over year. We've also removed the requirement, or proposing to remove the requirement to request a police clearance. There are only 1 or 2 other municipalities of our sister municipalities which request police clearances. They're not put in positions with vulnerable persons. They're not put in a position where they're managing town funds. I don't think it's a necessary requirement, so we're proposing that that be removed. Other than that, from what I could gather from all the different policies that we reviewed, the draft policy largely covers our current process, where the mayor would appoint members of council to committees, and council is the appointing body for laypersons. We also outlined in the policy a mechanism if there was a vacancy that occurred, or if there was an issue with attendance, where we could escalate that issue to the mayor so attendance could be addressed. Not because we have any attendance issues with our committees, only in the event that it does occur as the town grows and we have more committees, more meetings. These are just, things that could come up. I do not propose to go through the terms of reference for each committee. I'm hoping council was able to review those, and I'm happy to answer questions. But all the terms of reference for each of the committees follow the same standard format. There's a purpose and a mandate, a responsibility section which outlines the authority of the committee and whether those authorities are advisory or whether they have a final decision-making power, the membership composition, whether members of council or laypersons are appointed, whether there are administrative resources assigned to those committees, and then again, the meeting details outlining in general terms approximately how many meetings some of these committees would meet for in a given year. So for instance, the Accessibility Committee is mandated to meet a minimum of 4 times a year, so that would be included in those terms of reference. For water and wastewater, in discussions with Public Works, I think we have settled on a minimum of two meetings a year. So subject to any questions, this evening I'm asking that the policy framework be adopted and the terms of reference also be adopted. The intent is also, as each term of council changes over, that the framework and the committee terms of reference be reviewed.
Thank you. Members of council. Councillor Burns?
I'm certainly for police clearance on our representatives. I don't want to be caught in a situation where, as we're growing and new people are coming in, that someone with good intentions may have a prior conviction of something that does not stand up to what our code of ethics is. It is the only way that we will know that person qualifies for whatever committee. And I do understand that they're not put in a position to deal with children and those kinds of things, but I had to pick up my grandkids at a school. Well, I had to go for police clearance because they want to know who's there, and I think it's important that's kept between yourself and them. And I think that would be the only change that I think we should not give up. In the past, the 2 terms was created about 91, 95 in that area, because the people that we had on committees were there for 20 years, 25 years, and new people were applying back in those days to get on a committee, could never get on it. That's why that 2-term came in, and I can certainly see now that volunteerism is not as what it used to be, and I have no objections with the other recommendations, but I do like the police clearance for the integrity of the committee and our code of conduct, as and our community. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I'm going to disagree with my learned colleague. A conviction for simple possession of marijuana under the CDSA subsection 4.1 from 1972 would dissuade a senior person from serving on a committee. I will use cannabis as the example. Cannabis is legal. Michigan, with a Republican Senate, expunged everybody's cannabis convictions. What we're saying here is a person convicted of simple possession of one cannabis cigarette in 1965 does not meet the criteria, no matter how well they've lived their life, to sit on the Parks and Rec Committee. I just want that noted that I disagree with that, and I understand why, but we also have to look at the totality of exclusion. Who are the people that have records and or convictions that may want to serve because they've changed their lives? And I do say this again. When Canada legalized marijuana in 2018, we made a substantial flaw in not expunging the 500,000 people who have simple possession charges, not possession for the purpose of trafficking, but possession. No one then, therefore, no matter how wonderfully they've lived their life, moved to LaSalle, is able to contribute with a possession charge from 1965 because of 0.10 grams of the substance that's now legal. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? There being none, there is a recommendation ahead of you there if you are interested in removing that, or if there's something else we would like to present this evening. Councillor Desjardins?
Thank you. I would move the current recommendation. I agree that I think the police clearances are not necessary any longer at this point because of the committees that we're dealing with. So I would move that the recommendation go forward as written out.
Okay, so that is that the report of the Director of Council Services dated July 14th, 2023 regarding the committee framework be received, and that the committee governance policy be adopted, which policy shall replace the committee appointments policy and any other policy currently in force with respect to town-established committees, and that the terms of reference for the Accessibility Advisory Committee, Committee of Adjustment, Court of Revision, Parks, Recreation, and Events Committee, Personnel Committee, Public Planning Meeting Committee, and the Water Wastewater Committee be adopted and replace any terms of reference previously adopted by Council. Moved by Councillor Desjardins. I need support. Councillor Riccio Spagnolo. All in favor? Yes. And opposed. Okay, that carries. Consent agenda, there are 3 items. Is there anything we would like to discuss separately before we move them? Councillor Reno?
Yes, I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing here. This, I believe, is the municipality of Wawa and their firefighter. Yes. After reading the resolution and knowing that, finding volunteer firefighters is not always easy, knowing that from the time that I spent on the fire committee that we have young, able-bodied people that could become volunteer firefighters, but might not necessarily be able to afford to live in our community anymore. There just seems to be so many things working against people these days that if there's anything I can do to help the fire committee attract more quality people, I think that's something that we should support and send a letter of support off for. I know it doesn't really change too much, but it's just something that will help in the recruitment process, which I find any reports that I've heard over time has been a difficult process. So I would like to make a motion that we support that resolution.
Okay, so looking at item 2, which is the correspondence for the municipality of Wawa, we're looking to support and just to support.
To support, yes.
We have a mover.
I'll second that motion.
Second, Councillor Burns, all in favor? That carries. And then we still have item 1, which is the Q3 2023 LaSalle Fire Service Report, and item 3, the summary reports to council to receive. You get a motion to receive, Deputy Mayor Capata and Councillor Desjardins, all in favor? And that carries. Committee matters, we have the Essex County Council highlights from November 1st, 2023. Any questions or comments? There being none, if we can get a motion to receive the highlights of November 1st. Councillor Richo Spagnolo, Councillor Burns, all in favor? And that carries as well. Any questions or statements by council members? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to our administration, I have a question that came up to me as a result of being at the Volmer. And I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure that I can get back to the resident. It was a senior gentleman who was coming down the steps, and he noticed that we have holes drilled in the floor, and his background led him to believe that we were thinking about putting railings up. I looked at what I saw, and I wasn't sure. So I just wanted to ask admin if this is the case. I'll get back to the gentleman because I didn't know. Thank you.
I can confirm and get back to you, Councillor Akpata, but I don't believe there are any plans to put railings in that section of stairway, so I'll try to find out what those holes are for.
Thank you, Worship.
Any other questions or statements? Okay, there being none, notice is a motion. We don't have a closed session this evening, so we go into our bylaws. The recommendation is that the following bylaw be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed, which is bylaw 8836, a bylaw to authorize the execution of a developer subdivision agreement with, 10000048263 of Ontario Limited. Anyone? Deputy Mayor, support? Councillor Reno, all in favor? I know this is a long one for us. We're almost done. Our confirmatory bylaw is that the confirmatory bylaw 8837 be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed.
So
Councillor
moved.
Reno and Councillor Burns, all in favor? That carries. There's a schedule of meetings below. Reminder of our open house tomorrow night at the Volmer and budget sessions next Wednesday here at Town Hall. Thank you for joining us in person and through YouTube. Have a good night.